Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz, and we are here to kind of just inform you on a little bit about Penn State and a lot of bit about Michigan State, because here on Mondays, we don't quite have anything fresh from James Franklin, from Penn State players. That changes Tuesday, as you know. We get into our weekly press conference. We get into our player conversation. So we're going to talk in a moment about what we're monitoring for Penn State coming off of the victory against Rutgers, in which a bunch of new storylines emerged. Obviously, you're still keeping an eye on the health of this team after missing so many guys. But as I said, Stephen Brooks, who covers Michigan State for 24/7 Sports, will be with us in just a moment. He's going to break down this team that at 9-2, you may be surprised some of the things he says about this Spartans group and how he kind of views this game early on in the week. And this is a week where we are going to front load you with content on the podcast. Sean and I, like many of you, are going to be spending some time with family for the holidays. So look for a bunch of stuff early. And then, hey, if you want to save the pregame conversation for your ride home from Thanksgiving, that's great. But it'll be out before Thanksgiving, kind of our predictions episode. But Sean, without further ado, we got a lot to kind of parse through after that 28-0 victory for Penn State that we broke down in the postgame episode on Saturday.
The first thing we want to get to, we meant to do it in the post game before we signed off, and it got away from us. But condolences to the family of Steve Smith, former Penn State fullback, as you've probably seen by now. Of course, his battle with ALS, which was a very courageous, almost 20-year battle, which I can't even process in my head how hard that had to be. He passed away this weekend. So condolences to that family, his Penn State family. We know a lot of the older players have very fond memories about Steve Smith, and fans as well. So sorry to see that happening. And it's just it's a shame to see that sort of disease, the worst of that disease, because we see it with Steve Smith, Tim Shaw. It's just horrible thing to sit by. So our condolences to his family. We're sorry we didn't get to it in the post game, but moving on from that post game, a lot to be learned. I know it's Rutgers, 28-0, but a lot to be learned from this showing by Penn State. After that first quarter, even after that first half, weren't really sure what to make of it. Christian Veilleux comes in there, sort of cleans up some messes, throws 3 touchdown passes, and all of a sudden you get a little bit hopeful because you see the younger guys in there. You see Veilleux, you see Landon Tengwall, you saw some guys just kept popping up. Malik Mega had the long touchdown.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
Yeah, you got the ability to see some of these young guys, and that's what you want to see at these type end games. And again, we keep saying, of course, it's Rutgers, but at the same time, getting those guys out there against a live defense, it's not a scrimmage, it's not a practice against your own guys. To see those guys get out there and excel is certainly gives you a little bit of positivity heading into the offseason.
And you've got 2 games left here. We're not sure what game number 2 is going to look like. Game number 1's on the road in East Lansing against the number 12 team in the country. Nice opportunity for you right there. And that's probably the biggest question is, where is Sean Clifford coming out of this matchup? We know that he was impacted by an illness and he was on IV in the pregame, but we also understand that he's taken his lumps physically over the course of this season. Most recently, 7 sacks and 5 other hits against Michigan. And meanwhile, you got this long look of Christian Veilleux for 3 quarters. And all he did during those 3 quarters of work, Sean, was rack up 270 total offensive yards, give you a spark, 3 touchdown passes, 4 of his final 6 possessions for Penn State resulted in touchdowns. After the start of this game, I think 6 consecutive punts for Penn State. So you're wondering what might that look like? I know that the easy answer is, hey, if Sean Clifford is healthy, he's going to go, and he's going to go the entire game against Michigan State in this matchup. And I'd expect that will be where it lands at the end of this week. But all of a sudden, instead of the quarterback room having this cloud hovering over it and us wondering, how did it go so wrong? And there are some major blemishes, and it was a major factor in at least a couple of these losses this season. But you're exiting the season thinking, okay, what's number 9 there all about? And what maybe could he mean for this quarterback room the next few weeks, and then the first few weeks of next year when all of a sudden he's going to have some company?
Yeah, this has been your wheelhouse for the last couple of months here.
It's changed. It's nice. It's refreshing.
To see some tangible movement there too. I mean, because obviously he passed up Roberson, and we said it last week that or after the game that that's a matter of his improvement as well. I mean, everybody's going to look at that Roberson Iowa game and think that there's no way you want to put Roberson back out there, but at some point he has to pass him and pass him considerably, considering this is his first year in the program. Roberson has been in the program for 3 years. It's not an endorsement of Roberson by any sense of the imagination, but to see what he what Veilleux could come in and do. And he wasn't perfect. Let's be honest. I mean, he kind of looked like a freshman at times. And you mentioned the times that he was lowering his shoulder or taking an extra jump and coming up hobbling a little bit. Those things are things that you can look at the film and say, hey, maybe don't do that next time. You're really our only guy that was out there. No disrespect to Mason Stahl, who came in and had a really nice run at the end of the game. But it was just fun to watch Veilleux come around and do some things that you didn't expect from any of your quarterbacks. Clifford, to all the credit that we've given him for being a gamer and everything like that, you saw a little bit different from Veilleux, and that's fun. I mean, I don't know if it's the perfect difference or anything like that, but it was fun to watch. And you wonder, not specifically to Michigan State, but you wonder how much would he gain from bowl practices? How much could you throw him out there? Because we saw this with Christian Hackenberg to Trace McSorley, that sort of changing of the guard in the Tax Slayer Bowl against Georgia down in Jacksonville. There's value in that, and there's value in setting that up for the spring, setting that up for next year when you've got two freshmen coming in January, and you kind of feel like there's some stability and some hope there in that quarterback room.
And remember, in 2018, when this team was preparing for the Citrus Bowl and Trace McSorley's last game as starter, it was Sean Clifford getting that work as the number 2, getting those reps, even played a bit down there in Orlando because Tommy Stevens was sidelined, and that was obviously the storyline in the quarterback room moving forward with Sean Clifford's. But yeah, these reps are huge, and we've kind of been wondering, what is going to remain from this quarterback room long term for Penn State? How much will this room factor into plans? And the Sean Clifford stuff and the extra senior year that's still on the line for him, that is a fascinating conversation that I think that the further we get closer to him making a decision, the more confusing that gets from both sides and both perspectives. But right now, I think to see Christian go out there, not have any huge terrible moments where he's turned the ball over, because one turnover there when the game's still 7-0 or 14-0, you can really play into Rutgers' hands, give them the short field. He didn't do that, and then you got the explosive plays out of him. It's not like he was just protecting the ball and running up the middle and churning out 3-4 yards. There were some really impressive moments from this offense with him directing it. And ultimately, you come out of this one and you say, well, that salvaged our post-game conversation, because it was trending in a much different conversation for where that game was when Christian entered and even late into the first half. But again, it also makes you wonder, how does Penn State kind of allocate its quarterback reps here, not just in the week ahead, but maybe that month ahead? And we're going to have a mailbag question on this in just a moment. But it's a different conversation that pops up and elsewhere. How about at running back, Sean? Kevon Lee did get that opportunity to take on the first few series of this game. He finished 13 carries, 41 yards. He did have a touchdown off the left side that made it a 28-0 game. Had kind of an unimpeded path there to the end zone off the left side. 3.2 yards per carry on the day for Lee. I thought there were a few moments where he just hits that hole, gets to the second level. He's got 4 or 5 yards before he's even got to break a tackle. A few times he was trying to pick up 15, 20 yards, and it resulted in really him not getting past that line of scrimmage. It's been the trend that Jaywan Slater has pointed to since September, and something they'd like to see less of with Kevon Lee. Noah Cain was active again, but more of the same, really. 7 carries, 29 yards. That's over 4-yard average, which is, that's above where he has been, but nothing wow factor there. And then you get no Devin Ford, no John Lovett, and we actually got some Keziah Holmes for the first time in a long time. I guess that leads me to say I'm not sure what the backfield plan is. This is a matchup where on the other side, Kenneth Walker, we're going to hear in a moment, very questionable in terms of what his ability is, and where we don't yet know who the quarterback's going to be in East Lansing for Penn State quite yet. I'm not sure where the running game stands. It wasn't the game to pick that they would break out against Rutgers, and you did a good job avoiding that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that whole virus thing or the whole flu thing really made for some changes up front. And that, I mean, that kind of affected everything. And I'll be honest with you, the way that Penn State responded in the second half and like I said, credit Clifford, credit Caden Wallace, and anybody else that tried to go out and play and just couldn't get it done because they looked miserable. I'm not going to lie. That made you a little bit sick looking at it yourself. But credit those guys. But at the same time, turning it on, covering the spread, if we're going to go from that metric, a 28-point win. Of course, the defense tremendously helpful in that. But to turn it on, to make that make it a blowout, essentially for what you had on the table, that's a pretty good result. And I know we're going to keep going back to the Rutgers thing, and Rutgers offense was terrible and things like that. But I mean, they were put in positions where Penn State could have given up a big play, could have, let somebody behind them and turn that into 6, but they didn't. And that's what you get away from it. It's really hard to shut teams out, even bad teams. It's really hard to shut out in college football. And Penn State was able to do that defensively and then take advantage of what was there and hit a couple big plays. You had guys stepping up and, the mega touchdown was great, but the Parker Washington touchdown, that was pretty awesome because that wasn't a particularly great ball. Excuse me, voice crack there. Wasn't a particularly great ball. He went up and he made a play, and guys like Parker Washington asserting themselves as playmakers is something you've been missing through a stretch throughout the 2021 season.
Parker Washington, you mentioned mega wide open touchdown, 67 yards. That's a hello Beaver Stadium moment for him. And then Tyler Warren with a couple big catches downfield, and one particular that was with his fingertips snagging that one. Really impressive stuff. As referenced on the postgame pod, Veyu went out there, decided to trust in the talent around him, and it paid off in most cases. And he had a couple misses that scared you, but overall, again, didn't play into Rutgers' hand and giving them an opportunity to get their hands on the football over the course of this matchup. And that was really important as they kept their distance. And defensively, let's face it, 7 points might have been enough in this matchup. I don't know, you factor in field position if punts are still a thing, but Jordan Stout did his thing. We have to include him, it feels like, almost every week as a 12th man in part of the defensive conversation because of what he does in pinning opponents back. And with a team like Rutgers that does rely on getting some sparks via the short field, he just didn't give them any daylight, Sean. Really, five of these punts land inside the 10-yard line. 6 of his 8 punts inside the 20-yard line. That's just remarkable, and it really gives a team like Rutgers no opportunity, especially when you combine that with the Penn State defense that has been playing at a very high level all season long.
Yeah, he's like the 12th man on defense. He's like the 3rd or 4th on offense right now. He's been a threat for you. He's been tremendous. And let's not forget the coverage there. Drew Hartlob and Keaton Ellis both making very good plays down near the goal line to pin Rutgers deep. I mean, when you've got a weapon like that, I mean, it makes it's not always the right call to punt it on the other team's side of the field, but if you can do that and make it like clockwork where you're backing them up to the 2 or the 1 even, then it makes it a little bit easier to swallow. So Jordan Stout has been a weapon, will continue to be a weapon, has a big matchup this week, as we'll get into with Stephen Brooks here in a little bit, with Bryce Behringer from Michigan State, the 2 top-rated punters in the conference according to yards per punt. So another fun punter matchup. That's what we come here for in the Big Ten.
Well, Jordan Stout crossed Adam Korsak off his list, and he was the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week once again 4 times this year now. Did it last week against Michigan, this time around against Rutgers, week 1 against Wisconsin, and then game 5 against Indiana. So all 4 of them happening in Big Ten play. That means half of Penn State's games in the conference this year have resulted in Jordan Stout being named the top specialist in the conference. What a remarkable year for a guy they're asking to do everything. And I know that eligibility is left on the table, but he's got a lot ahead of him in this sport.
Yeah, I think he's gone. I think he's gone one head-to-head that he lost, and that was the Iowa game. And that was not so much him losing it as the other guy was just fantastic. I mean, basically, he did to Penn State what Stout did to Rutgers this week. Just keep backing him up, and kind of the same result there.
We do have a 5-star mailbag. We're going to get to that ahead of the conversation with Stephen Brooks on Michigan State. And it's also going to lead us to talk about what happened on the offensive line last Saturday, because I know a lot of our listeners probably wondering where things are for that offensive front after missing 3 starters and a bunch of other guys getting involved. So the question this time around, Mr. Fitz, leads us to what lies ahead in the next month, and it's an important one. Penn State's chances for a big bowl game have been blown up, but what can the team gain from a postseason experience after not having one last year?
Well, those practices are invaluable, not so much for the guys that are heading out, but for the younger guys that we've seen step up from just from time to time. I'm trying to think of an example in my head, and it's not coming to me, but there's a bunch of guys on this roster that will benefit from those extra practices. Wouldn't have gotten that last year. You had maybe an extra week of typical game practices. So in the bowl, what you're doing is your season's going to end in late November. You're going to keep keep the options open. Coaches usually go on the road, and you've got signing day coming up and everything like that. But you have basically camp practices where you can take your young guys, you can put them in there with your game prep, your varsity teams, for lack of a better word, and they can get valuable reps through that before you get into game prep. Last year would have just been game prep, so you wouldn't have gotten too much from it. But you can go position by position, and there's a lot of guys that can really benefit on this roster because you have so many young guys. Christian Veilleux, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself, right? I mean, you got Sean Clifford, even if he does stick around, light reps for Clifford means more reps for Veilleux, which means more experience points. And you saw what you got on him on Saturday. Say the same in the running back room with a guy like Keziah Holmes. Came in, showed a little bit of spark there against Rutgers. Receiver Malik Mega is a guy that's steadily climbed the charts. You got Harrison Wallace as well, Trey Wallace, that you could throw in there in that conversation. But you've got Mega as a potential starter next year, maybe getting some of those reps where Jahan Dotson needs to step aside, and nobody's saying Jahan Dotson needs to step aside in the game, but give him a couple days off. He's earned it. The offensive line is the point that you wanted to get to. We saw a bunch of those guys on Saturday because of the illness. No Rasheed Walker, barely any Caden Wallace, no Mike Miranda. You saw Landon Tengwall get the start. And, this was a situation early where it was a kind of a shell shock situation. He settled into the game. He did a really nice job against Rutgers playing tackle. And I'm seeing him as a guy that could play tackle, could play guard. And there's a couple of those guys on this roster. So you'd like to see how much he could play tackle, because as we've seen this season, not having tackles can be an issue. And Penn State's been there. Jimmy Chris is another guy. Olu Fashano's been hurt for a couple of weeks, but you get those guys. If Fashano can get healthy, get those guys valuable reps, get him in there. Take Miranda, put him to the side because he's a veteran. Take Rasheed Walker, put him to the side because he's a veteran, and get those guys worked in through there, because that's where you're going to get basically your first round of spring practice for a group of offensive linemen who, there's jobs to be won there.
And I think when you get through this Michigan State matchup, you're only going to have maybe two guys who you can't play in the bowl game. Otherwise, you'll lose red shirt. I think it's Kobe King at linebacker and Jamari Budden at linebacker. And if that list is longer, I'm wrong, but I don't think it is. I think everybody else right now can play in the next game and then play in a bowl game, and they'll still be a freshman again next year. And that includes Landon Tengwall, of course. And it was really interesting to see him land at left tackle. We'd been seeing him work on the right side during practice sessions when we got to look at him. Obviously, going back to the earliest conversations of his recruitment, it's been, where does he land? He talked about, hey, wherever I can find a path to playing time and wherever Penn State and Phil Troutwine need me. Thus far, through 10 games, we didn't get a chance to see him. And then he surfaces at left tackle. I'm still of the mind that despite a performance that was, just exactly kind of where you thought Landon might be based on what we talked about him, I thought he responded well to some of the early series. And then I think you used the phrase settled in and just used that technique and never was really thrown off over the course of this matchup in a way that I think even highly touted freshmen, regardless of who you're matched up in, you're getting thrown in a game week 11, you should expect some issues to surface. And I thought he did a nice job working through that. I'm sure there was a lot behind the scenes that he was dealing with, growing from. So really important for him to get all those reps. And it was a lot of reps with Caden Wallace missing so much time. I think guys like Nick Dawkins, where is he right now in your plans here moving forward at center, at guard, maybe Golden Israel, Achumba, Ibrahim Traore. It's not so much about Jimmy Christ. It's not so much about guys who are going to show up in this bowl game. It's the fact that because you're not preparing week by week for a Big Ten opponent right now, your coaching staff, from the offensive coordinator to the positional coach to the assistants that work around them, you're going to have a chance to really take a longer look at a lot of these guys who've kind of been lost in the shuffle. As much as you want to bring up young players, Sean, you got to win games on Saturdays, and it's difficult for a staff to allocate as much attention on some of these younger players during the course of the season. Once you get through the regular season and you get between like Thanksgiving and Christmas, you learn a lot about kind of those year one guys. And I think because of how last year went with the pandemic, it's also really important for a lot of the year two players on the roster.
Yeah, and to me, you want to learn a lot about what you have at tackle, because you've got the transfer from Harvard coming in, Spencer Rolland, who's probably a tackle, but you've got a couple of guys on this roster that are swing guys. And we had Landon Tengwall ranked as the nation's number 10 offensive tackle last year. Kind of like him as a guard better. I think long term, if you put him in the NFL, probably going to be a guard. Caden Wallace, we talked about a bunch, liked as a guard. Fashano, you have as a tackle. Jimmy Christ, you have as a tackle. I mean, Jimmy Christ was scout team 3 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden he's getting reps in there last week, and fine. I'm fine with how he played. I mean, you think maybe a little bit more promise than you would have thought based on his scout team reps. So I think you got to find out what you've got to tackle, because you've got to attack that next year and figure out what your ideal offensive line looks like. And then of course, you're going to get reinforcements with Rolland here coming in after his graduation, similar to what Eric Wilson did. So probably in the early summer, late spring. So yeah, there's a lot to learn in these couple of weeks between Thanksgiving and New Year's, or wherever you're going to play your bowl game. And on that offensive line is huge. I also think on the defensive line is a big spot for them, because you've got guys, a bunch of those redshirt freshmen, or that's so murky in terms of what you're looking at for eligibility. But Zariah Fisher's in there, Davon Townley, the true freshman from Minnesota. Maybe you get to see what you got from him. Smith Vilbert's played a little bit more, and inside Fatoma Molba and Jordan Vandenberg are guys that have gotten spot duty out there, and you see what guys that have gotten spot duty, like Keziah Izzard did last year, like Devon Ellis did last year. Those guys all of a sudden might be starting for you in a year. So starting to cultivate a little bit more depth and talent at defensive tackle, even though it's not the frontline starter type guys, but those guys can really show up in a big way next year.
And a few other names, just because you're about to get a major influx of offensive firepower from this 2022 recruiting class in a few weeks, and when they enroll in January. Some guys who I'm curious to see how they withstand that, where they're at going into next spring. You mentioned Trey Wallace, but Liam Clifford still, hasn't been a guy who's surfaced in games, and also Jaden Dotton. And based on some of the feedback last week from Taylor Stubblefield about the second-year receiver that came in the same class as Malik Mega and Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith, it didn't sound like he was to the point where he was ready to enter a game really over the course of this season. A lot in factoring in there was kind of a bit of a murky answer, but it's a murky situation with him. So another month of practice, what can he gain from it? What could he maybe lose from it? I think there's a lot to look at with a guy like that in his career. And then Khalil Dinkins in that tight end room, someone you've mentioned a few times. What can he do with his final month here on the practice field, working behind a group of tight ends who've played a lot of football ahead of him here in 2021? Hadn't had a chance to see anything from him really. So what do they evaluate him as an athlete, as a tight end? There's a few of those kind of questions that this staff is going to be wondering in January. Like we talked about Zariah Fisher last year. What do you want to do with him long term? Khalil Dinkins is one of those players that we knew going back to sign day last year. Maybe he's in the crosshairs for a conversation after you've had a full year sample size on the practice field to see what he fit for you now, and maybe where he fits for you 1, 2, 3 years down the line.
He got to play at tight end this weekend, but going back to his recruitment, I'd love to see that kid at linebacker. And speaking of linebacker, take it easy on Ellis Brooks in bowl practice. The guy has been beat up. He's been playing with a cast for much of this season. So guys like Tyler Elsdon, guys like Kobe King, who you mentioned probably not going to play again this year.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing there with him.
Yeah, and then Budden as well, especially if you've got to move Curtis Jacobs into the box next year and see what you got with Jamari Budden out there at the Sam. Then that's going to be an interesting one. In the secondary, of course, Kalen King and Johnny Dixon have played before, but Tariq Castro Fields, he's not coming back, obviously. So you get some reps in there for those guys. And Zaki Wheatley is a really interesting one. He played on special teams this week. I think he got in at the end of the game as well. They played one play on defense. I'll have to check my tweet to see if he was one of the corners there. Long, athletic, ball skills, also did not get to play much due to COVID during his senior season. So you've got an opportunity to see what you've got in a guy like that. Maybe he's a guy that can crack that rotation next year, or potentially move to safety, because when Penn State recruited him, they recruited him as a safety and put him at corner, work on those skills, and it's going to depend on some other guys in that room. But very intrigued by what Zaki Wheatley can bring to the table.
For those maybe wondering, hey, we are in late November now. What are you talking about going down the depth chart like this? Go check out Mark Brennan's story about just how close Mason Stahl was to starting for the Nittany Lions on Saturday. Depth is extremely important, and obviously a lot of the conversation we're having now is regarding the 2022 roster, but you're in kind of a balancing act mode if you're the Penn State staff. And oh, by the way, trying to get to the finish line with a really talented recruiting class. A ton going on right now. You can monitor it at lions247.com. We are going to talk right now with a Michigan State reporter, Stephen Brooks, and get a better feel for what Penn State's facing up in East Lansing this week. Let's talk about this upcoming matchup on Saturday. You heard him last year on this very same podcast. He covers the Michigan State Spartans. Stephen Brooks from 24/7 Sports Spartan Tailgate. Stephen, interesting week to run into you. Obviously, a much higher note at different points of this year on a 9-win campaign here through 11 matchups. But Michigan State's coming in after a definitive loss that was set very early. We were checking the score from the press box, and we kind of couldn't believe how it was evolving for the Spartans. What is it like in East Lansing right now, talking to the coaches, players, coming off of that kind of a performance?
Yeah, it's about, kind of what you'd expect, just, salvage this thing, so the Big Ten's off the table. Obviously, the playoff is off the table. For Kenneth Walker, the Heisman might be off the table after that. So, just about playing for pride, and salvaging this deal. 10 wins, we all know it just looks better than 9. It's literally just one unit, but it looks so much better. It feels so much better. And then, of course, you can get to 11 in a bowl game, and that feels even better. So, that's kind of the deal, just trying to circle the wagons. There's maybe we'll get into it, but from the outside, folks, I think, accept that this is a house money situation. And literally just an hour ago, Mel Tucker was at the podium and said, I hate that. It's not a house money deal, to me. And you can have a conversation there, I think. But it is still year 2. I say that just to say it's still year 2. And they're still building some things, behind the scenes, and all the wins they picked up obviously are great. And those are very, very encouraging signs. But in terms of culture, in terms of responding to situations like this, in terms of just what this program's made out of, they're still trying to cement some of that stuff and build some of that stuff. And I think that this game will be part of that. How do you bounce back after just getting your head taken off,
Stephen, coming into the season, I believe the over-under for wins for Michigan State was 4.5, something like that.
Yeah.
Now that it's 9-2, how what has that roller coaster been like? Because we talk about expectations, and then all of a sudden, I mean, this is more than double the win total for Michigan State, and now people upset because they lost to Ohio State. What is the recalibration of where this program's at right now?
Yeah, so it has been very interesting, like you said. I mean, you've almost gotten whiplash, sort of readjusting them, because as you mentioned, 4.5 wins, and even that seemed sort of almost laughably low at the time. Most folks came into this year saying, get to 6-6, go to a bowl, and we've taken that step, and we can take another one in year 3. 7 maybe if things broke right. 8 is a dream season, and now they're already at 9, of course. So it has been an interesting process. From within, Tucker and the coaches have kind of said, hey, we kind of think we got a team here, at least in our top 22. And this was something that Tucker just talked about again today as well. He said in camp, he sort of had a meeting with them as hey, guys, I've been around long enough. I think we got something here. We believe it. Do you believe it? With our top 22. But he in the same conversation, he said, no, here's the bad news. We don't have the depth to do that, if we start losing some guys. And that's really hit near the second part of the year. So like you said, it's been interesting just because on the one hand, I think some folks can sort of look back and put themselves back in August and say, man, I never saw this coming. This is amazing. Then on the other hand, you've lived through September and October, and you're like, well, maybe there's more here, and so there's that disappointment. All in all, I still think, I've said this a few times, no matter what this year ended up being, even if this team made the playoffs somehow, and at no point this year did I think that they were a playoff caliber team. I know they were up there in the rankings. I know they had the resume, but having watched every game in person, I never thought that this was a playoff caliber team that could go in there and even remotely compete. It would have looked like Ohio State against any other playoff team. I thought that the entire way, even as they were kind of overachieving. So what my point was, I've said a couple of times on different things, whatever this season became, it was never going to be Mel Tucker's best team at Michigan State. Even if they went to the playoff, which would have matched, obviously, Mark Antonio's sort of career high there and all that, it was never going to be his best team based on how he's recruiting, based on how he operates. I mean, I have full faith that he's going to get a much better roster put together at some point, maybe next year, maybe a couple, than this one. So that's kind of the deal. Folks here have quickly, fallen off their feet from Mel Tucker. We all know the big contracts looming out there and everything, and folks might have their opinions and everything. But here within the Michigan State fan base, folks have completely bought in, completely. And I don't think there's many people that root for this team and support this team and watch this team that have much of a problem with that number, even though I know there's been some debate and commentary, on that since that all came out. So interesting times, and we'll see how they cap it off from here. Like I said,
Stephen, with the way the last regime went, I mean, you could cover Michigan State for the last 15 years, and this is only the second head coach you're dealing with covering this football program. But the way it ended with Mark D'Antonio, 7 wins back-to-back years, they had a 3-win season, all that following that playoff appearance just back in 2015, I believe that was. Now 2-5 under Mel Tucker last year. How startling has this turnaround been, the way the pendulum has swung back, and what has really fueled it ultimately? Because as you said, 8 wins sounded like a dream, and they got past that, 3 weeks ahead of Thanksgiving?
Right. So, yeah, it has been very startling, right from the first play, literally the first play of the season, Kenneth Walker bounces a run outside, 75-yard touchdown. You're like, haven't seen many of those lately. Haven't seen many touchdowns lately. Did not literally no rushing touchdowns from running back last year. So I hadn't seen that in a season.
Wow.
So there were some early signs. Then, the Miami win, you're like, wow, okay. And then been some moments. Rutgers, they just destroyed them in sort of highlight fashion. And so different steps along the way, you started to sort of wonder about maybe how real is this? Okay, maybe it's pretty real. It's getting there. And, they keep winning. In terms of how it happened, it's 2 things. And I've got a very well-rehearsed script here because I've talked about this every single week. So I'll try to keep it brief, though. It's 2 things. First, just having the offseason together with these coaches. COVID affected everybody, that has to be said, but I don't think it affected any program more than Michigan State. You got to remember, Mel Tucker was hired on February 12th, 2020. So even a guy like Greg Schiano, I believe, was hired in December. First-year coaches in 2020 were already 1 to 2 or more months into their gigs. They knew what they could do. They could do a little transfer portal magic. They could do some late signing period stuff. Mel Tucker didn't have either of those things. And then 1 month later, campus was deserted. So anyway, no spring ball, no traditional summer workouts, none of that stuff. Camp, 4 or 5 days in, they call it off, then they reconvene a month later, all that stuff. So this year they had a full January, and they really, really like their strength staff and what they're doing there. They've got a full-time nutritionist now that they think is doing really, really positive things for them. The summer, the full 15 spring balls, the regular camp. So players knowing coaches better, coaches knowing players better, literally understanding the schemes better, all those things finally got to happen this year. That's one major part of it. The second major part of it is the roster renovation. They've got over 30 new guys on this team from a year ago. So, we all know that's about a third of a college football roster. That's a lot to turn over in 1 year. 15 of those guys are scholarship transfers, so they hit that end hard. And just like I mentioned earlier, their top 22 on both sides were unquestionably better. They're still not very deep at many places, as we're observing right now. But there was no doubt that they were more talented and that the competition at certain positions was better than a year ago. So, it's just point blank. They're a better team now. They have better players now. And then again, they had the full offseason, the weight room, the spring ball, all that stuff. It's those 2 things put together that it really explain why they are where they are right now.
Let's talk about that depth, because injuries have mounted up very quickly for Michigan State. Mel Tucker said today there's a significant amount on both sides of the ball and on special teams. Of course, you're going with the next man up mentality, but what can you realistically expect from Michigan State this weekend from an injury standpoint, among not just Joe every guy in there playing in the line, but their stars are hurting too.
Right. So I thought it was going to be a battle with Penn State, with the team that showed up to Columbus, and that was already a team that was limited, and now the team coming out of that game against Ohio State, they lost a couple more key guys, and I don't know if they'll be back, all of them, some of them, any of that. Now I do not feel good about Michigan State's chance, just because they're so depleted. You're talking about a senior safety, Xavier Henderson, the only guy that's been a captain every single week. If he's not their leading tackler, he's in like the top 3. Very important player on the defense, their main communicator, their main leader. He left and didn't return in the second half. Kenneth Walker, everyone knows him. I think it was 1 touch in the second half, I want to say, and did not return after that. So he's nicked up. They came to Columbus without Jalen Naylor, their number 2 receiver. Their number 1, Jaden Reed, went down in that game, did not return after halftime. Jarrett Horst, their starting left tackle, one of the transfer guys, came in from Arkansas State and it really, really boosted them at left tackle. That was a position of weakness for a long time. Allowed some other guys to move back to their natural positions, sort of stabilize things there a little bit. He's been out for multiple weeks now. Charles Brantley, a corner, one of their top 4 corners, has been out and is not. He's got a season-ending shoulder deal. And so the three corners that they really play a lot that are able to play, none of them are 100% by any means. Ronald Williams, the Alabama transfer, is playing with a bad back, and Marquis Lowry, a Louisville transfer, has been playing with sort of a recurring injury. I think it's a hamstring. It's something that's been nagging him the whole year. Anybody else? Quavaris Crouch, starting linebacker, Tennessee transfer. He came out with a brace on. He was late to warmups. I thought he wasn't going to play, and he came out at the last second and did some 11-on-11. Had a brace on his knee, which he doesn't usually have, and then he at some point exited and did not return. I think it was second half for him. So, like I mentioned, their top 22, as we saw, got them to 8-0, got them all the way up there with everything in front of them, and then really around the Michigan game, the Purdue game, they started to fray at the seams a little bit, and this Ohio State game, they really started breaking down. So I'm curious to see who's going to be back, but they were not a team that was going to survive this volume of injuries, especially all at once.
Fellas, if we got like a full-fledged injury report, NFL style, it would be like a very long scroll today. Between these two teams, illness involved there. And obviously you talk about a banged-up team. The name that's going to jump off the audio there and all the things you typed this week about these injuries is Kenneth Walker, of course, right around 1,500 rushing yards, guy who put himself in that Heisman conversation. Just a phenomenal performance against Michigan, of course, his signature moment. But here we are in the regular season finale. What do you think Michigan State is capable of doing offensively if we're talking about a limited Kenneth Walker, or worst case scenario, guy who's not available at all on Saturday?
Right. So without Kenneth Walker, as much as I just said they're a better team, top 22 is better, more talent than a year ago. Without Kenneth Walker, this is a 500 team, give or take a game. He has been a massive difference maker. And his numbers, of course, explain a lot, but so much of what they want to do offensively and have done and had success with is built around him. Not just handing him the ball, and he can make magic happen that way, but they've been extremely efficient and productive on play action. And obviously that's, exponentially more effective when you've got Kenneth Walker back there as opposed to anybody else. Like they run flea flickers almost every week, and they don't even consider it a trick play. They just say, hey, it's a play action pass. This is part of our offense. And that can only happen if you have a guy like Kenneth Walker back there. So it's allowed Peyton Thorne to sort of grow in the position as a first-year starter. And again, like quite literally, a lot of their big plays in the passing game have come off of play action, or just can be correlated back to Kenneth Walker back there. So I would be concerned if he's slowed, because we've seen, we saw him in that game. I don't think he came in 100%, and he just didn't look right, and so much of his game is open field, flashy, herky-jerky, make you miss in a phone booth type of stuff. I mean, he's not he's not a guy I think that can give you much at less than full strength. He'll try, he plays really hard, runs really hard, but his game is making you miss in space and getting out on the edge and then running by you. Those are really hard things to do, if you're not 100%. The receivers then, so you don't even have that element. You might not have your top two receivers. And this is a team that I like the receiver depth. I think the guys that could step in or maybe will step in are good players. I think they've got some dudes who could play at a lot of Big Ten schools, just sort of waiting in the wings, to be honest. But they just haven't rotated them that much this year. When they were healthy, their top three receivers played easily 90% of the offensive snaps. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but easily 90%. They did not rotate very liberally at receiver at all. So these guys, while I like them and I think they got some promise, they just don't have much experience at all. And a game like this, a good team like Penn State, you can't afford that wide open drop pass that would have been a first down, because the guy has played 2 games this year or has his hands on it. He takes a little bit of a hit and he drops it because he's not used to getting hit full speed like that. Things like that. And I just, of course, Kenneth Walker is a legitimate Heisman candidate, but I don't really love the backs behind him, either. It's not like they got a guy that you can feel good about getting you through a day, especially against a team like Penn State. I would say, if it was a lesser opponent, then I think they could maybe scrape their way through. But I don't love anybody's ability to give them even a shade of what Kenneth Walker could do, and so I think that's concerning. And then you've got a ton of concerns on defense, even when they were healthy, and as we've talked about, they're not healthy there either. So I think it's going to be a challenge, a big challenge for Michigan State, and they're gonna, if they somehow win this game, they're gonna have earned it, because they're gonna have to do it the hard way, I would imagine.
For the Penn State fans listening, what's kind of the backstory on Walker getting to Michigan State? He was very productive kid out of Memphis, went to Wake Forest, where he put up one of my favorite stat lines ever. He rushed for 579 yards 2 years in a row, I think it was.
Yeah.
But then entered the portal. Michigan State, of course, leaned heavily on the portal. How did he end up in East Lansing, basically?
Yeah. So he wasn't, for somehow a lot of people missed on him. I mean, he was I think he was a 2-star, maybe 3-star kid coming out of high school. I want to say Wake was his first, maybe only Power 5 offer. I think like Old Dominion and maybe Kent State or something were sniffing around. Just was a real under the radar guy coming out of high school, goes to Wake Forest and has 2 nice years, like you said, but was never the starter there. And now you see what he's doing now. You're like, what are those guys? What are they seeing down there? But part of it was, you guys, and folks that might be listening, if you've seen Wake Forest play, their run game is a lot of this read option stuff, but it's a very slow, delayed mesh point deal where the quarterback rides the ball in the gut of the running back
mesh point.
and lets it ride, and it's a really long read thing. It's not just here, boom, you got the ball, go. It's a very delayed deal, and so that I don't think was the best fit for him. He still was productive in it, and he still had some really impressive highlights. And when they got him, I'm like, that's a pretty nice pickup. That's a guy that can play. And so their main thing was selling them on getting the ball now, going downhill now. You get the ball right away, read the blocks, and go. There's no delay, there's no waiting, there's no hesitation. And that's what he was looking for. He was looking for a different offense when he went into the portal. And they were like, hey, we need all the help we can get. Like I mentioned earlier, none of our running backs scored a touchdown last year. And so they were trying to upgrade talent and basically, looking for a number one back. And he's been that and more. He impressed the coaches up here right away. And they'll all tell you they thought he was going to be good. I'm sure if you went and had a beer with him, though, they'd all tell you that he's even better than that. We all thought he'd be, like I said, I saw his tape. I was like, that's a nice pickup. I did not expect him to be a Heisman contender. I did not expect him to be arguably the best running back in the country, whether it's him or Robinson or pick your pick, I guess. But so that's kind of the deal there. Came over here right away and just impressed in the weight room. And then like the first time he gets his hands on the ball, he's making dudes miss and doing all the stuff we ended up seeing this year. And a couple of defensive players have said later, we'd be in spring ball and this guy's just making us look silly and running out, running downfield. We're breaking our necks trying to find him. And they're like, is he really good or are we really bad? And maybe the truth is, I guess, a little bit of both. But he is really good. And like I said, he sort of proved it from the first day he got here. And he's been the reason more than anybody else that they've been able to overachieve and have this success.
What are your thoughts on this Michigan State defense? Clearly in a couple losses here, big point totals on the other side of the matchup. This is a game where right now we haven't heard from James Franklin. We haven't heard from anybody, but we're coming off of seeing 2 quarterbacks involved, including a true freshman. Michigan State, any talk about preparing for multiple quarterbacks in this matchup? And additionally, in general, Jahan Dotson and what they might be facing with him in this matchup, kind of depleted secondary from a medical standpoint based on what you said.
Yeah. So we Tucker didn't get into the 2 quarterback thing. He faced a little bit of that with Michigan, with McCarthy. So it's something they're aware of. He's a defensive coach. I'm sure he's on top of that. He didn't explicitly get into it today. But in terms of Michigan State's defense, so what they've been all year is they have reset the standard of bend but don't break. And it's an old football cliche, and we hear it every Sunday on NFL games. But they were the definition of that. They would give up all the yards in the world between the 20s, and then in the red zone, they'd be able to stiffen up. Somehow they would find a way and bow up and hold people to field goals or get a turnover. And that's how they got to 8-0. That's how they got where they got early in the season. And it was still concerning because they were getting a lot of passing yards put up on them, and they basically have every week. And now that's even more of a concern. Like I mentioned, they're down one of their top 4 corners. At least 2 of their other 3 are not at 100% out there playing. So we saw what happens against a good passing game just last weekend. I mean, Ohio State sliced and diced them every single way possible. They had no shot to compete there defensively because their defensive backfield just isn't that good. Even when it was healthy, like I said, they gave up a ton of yards. So anybody with a competent passing game has to come in and feel good about what they can do against Michigan State. These guys, they don't cover very well. Sometimes they don't tackle very well downfield. But that's the biggest thing is receivers can just kind of get whatever they want. And they're usually happy giving them the underneath stuff, of course, with the idea of keeping it in front of them and preventing the big play. But even the big play has been there lately, They're just they don't have a lot of answers back there right now, schematically or personnel wise. And like I said, of course, Ohio State can stress everybody that way, but that was the ultimate nightmare for Michigan State. I mean, you're banged up with a group that was already underperforming against three NFL receivers and an amazing quarterback in Stroud, and that's exactly what I thought could happen, and it's exactly what happened. And then they don't rush the passer well either. So you've got guys that can't cover very well on the back end. They don't get after the passer very well at all, especially with their front floor. They've turned up their blitzing a little bit more later in the season now to try to switch things up a little bit, and they're not even that great of a blitzing team, to be honest, either. But just with their front four, they get very little pressure, so that obviously hurts what they're doing on the back end too. The one thing they do well defensively is stop the run. They're very deep at defensive tackle. They're very experienced, really at end too. They're a good run stopping D line. They don't rush the passer very well, but they can clog up the middle and just wear you down and muddy up the front. It's very hard to run on them because of that depth, because of that experience. The linebackers are solid. They fill well. But anything in the passing game is pretty much trouble for Michigan State right now.
Steven, you're making them sound like the worst 9-win team in the country.
It sounds like he's shooting straight here. He is.
Yeah, I'm telling you what I'm seeing. I'm being honest. And like I said, I mean, it's not that it was fluky, but you can look at their schedule and see who they beat, and that was a different team though as well. I mean, this team that's going to take the field now just isn't the team that went 8-0. It's literally just not the same guys. So that's part of it. And yeah, I do think some of their success this season is fortunate with respect to the schedule and everything. I mean, Miami isn't what they thought they'd be. They've turned it around a little bit, but they're not what they thought they'd be. Northwestern was not a returning Big West champion, that you would fear or anything like that. So you can look at it and kind of go, okay, I kind of understand a little bit more now. But they that's not to take anything away from them. You got to play who you got to play. And they beat them, so they got those wins fair and square.
It's like it's almost like with fandom, you watch one team so much and you can see the warts, you can see everything pop up, and that's the stuff that gets magnified. I mean, we see it, we run message boards for God's sake, so we see all that kind of stuff. Peyton Thorne, quarterback, he's a guy that came in, I think he got his first start against Penn State, if I'm correct. But he's had a season, 22 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, obviously leaning heavy on that run game has been helpful for him. Is he a guy that if Kenneth Walker's not playing, if he doesn't have those receivers, is he a guy that's going to, come out and put this one on his shoulders? I know he's a gamer for sure. But is he going to come out and put this one on his own shoulders and win a game for Michigan State?
I honestly couldn't tell you. That's kind of one of the next steps that we're waiting to see because, like I mentioned earlier, so much of his success has been built off of play action or the threat of Kenneth Walker or just the incredible balance. That was really the story of their offensive season, the first half, just the incredible balance. They could do it either way, and they could hurt you really bad either way. So we haven't had to see him. They haven't played with a lot of deficits either. They scored on the first play, the first 2 weeks of the season. They've played with a lot of leads this year. So we haven't had to see Peyton Thorne go win them the game. The closest thing probably was the Maryland game. And there were some positive signs there, but he had Jaden Reed, and they're if you guys have watched the Michigan State game, you've heard it. They went to middle school together. They've known each other a very, very long time. They're very, very close. Thorne will gamble some throws to Reed that he would only throw to Reed. So that's something to consider if he's not able to play this week. Otherwise, though, Peyton Thorne is not a gambler at all. He's a grandson of a coach, son of a coach. Very, very cerebral with how he plays the position. And I've always said this throughout this year, his greatest strength, because physically he really won't wow you, 6'1", 6'2", doesn't have a cannon arm or anything, can move pretty well, can hurt you in the run game if you fall asleep, but, he's not Johnny Manziel. But his greatest strength is just his smarts. He will not, for the most part, there's been some occasions, but for the most part, he will not put the offense in a bad position. If it means he's got to eat a sack, he'll eat the sack. He won't go struggle with the ball and try to make a play and get it knocked out. He won't do that. He won't force it on 3rd and long if the guy's, blanketed by the DB. He just will, even if it's scramble out of the pocket and run out of bounds for a loss of 1 or whatever, and you got to punt the next play, he's going to make the smart play. He's not going to turn it over very often. He's not going to force things. He's not going to get crazy with the ball. He's going to make the smart play 9 out of 10 times, even if it's the boring play or the drive killing play. Like I said, like he's very good at that. He's very accurate. Can make the plays there. He's got a good deep ball, and they'll challenge people deep. But in terms of that him putting the game on his shoulders, without Walker, without maybe his top two receivers, we just haven't seen something like that because he has kind of always had that benefit of one or the other. If it wasn't Walker, he had his receivers out there and they were making big plays for him. If it wasn't them making big plays, he could hand it to Walker and he was getting 200 yards or close to it. So that's kind of the next step, I think, in his growth and his development that we need to see is, can he go win them a game? Of course, let's just be honest, it's harder to do without your best guys, so maybe does it say anything about him? Does it say anything about his cast? We'll have to dissect that, I guess. But I'm kind of curious to see that as well. And this is obviously a perfect opportunity for him to show that and make those strides if that's what he's capable of.
Stephen, I'll leave you with this one. The matchup ahead of us on Saturday, it sounds like from some of your phrasing, the way you're talking about the team you cover, you sound like you've considered them a bit of an underdog going into this matchup. If that's inaccurate, you can tell me. Where are you kind of leaning at this stage with several days still to go in game week and a lot to learn on the injury report? I'm just kind of digging through some of the things we've heard from you, and I guess that's kind of where I'm taking it.
Yeah. No, like I said, I mean, I know folks outside of, folks around here had sort of gotten sour on Penn State and once they'd suffered a few losses and had sort of discarded them, quite honestly. I never did. I always thought this was a solid team, and I haven't watched every snap like you guys have, so maybe I'm off base, maybe I'm the dummy here, but I always thought that they were, right in that, firmly in that second tier. Ohio State, of course, is its own tier. Nobody's in that tier with them. But I thought they were always firmly in that second tier, and I didn't think Michigan State was at the start of the season, of course. I've always had Penn State there, so I never really lost faith in them. Like I said, the team that showed up to the Horseshoe, I thought it'd be dicey. The team that left the Horseshoe, I don't feel good about right now. Just without, it's Monday, I just don't know who's going to be back, but I don't think all of them will. I think maybe Walker might give it a go. I don't know on Reed, but I'm kind of doubtful on him. Crouch, I have no idea about. Henderson said he expected to be back, but that was just after the loss, so maybe who knows what happens there. And if all those guys are out, then yeah, that's a real problem. If even half of them are out, I think it's real dicey. So yeah, I'm not loving Michigan State's chances. I just think Dodson is a guy that could absolutely burn them. Like I mentioned earlier, anybody with a competent passing game right now is going to have a field day against this team. That's just reality. They're not physically equipped to really defend a high-level passing attack. They really weren't when they were healthy, and now they're far from that. So it's really hard for them to defend a good passing game. And without their good weapons on offense, I don't know if they can keep pace. Normally, I would say this is an offense that can get into the 30s pretty easily. They can trade touchdowns with a lot of teams, but without their top two receivers, if that's the case, without Walker, if that's the case, my confidence in that is severely diminished. So yeah, I think MSU's got their work cut out for them. Right now, if I had to pick a winner, yeah, I would pick Penn State. I don't feel good about the depth that they might have to go to in this game, and I think Penn State, like just about anybody else, is going to be able to throw the ball around on them. I don't think the offense is really equipped right now to be able to keep pace.
Kenneth Walker's good, and the two receivers very good as well. But let's talk about the most important part of this game, Bryce Behringer. And I think I'm saying that right, Behringer, the number one punter in the Big Ten per average yards per punt, is going up against Jordan Stout, the number two, the four-time Big Ten punter of the week or specialist of the week. This is a good matchup, man. I know we kind of chronicle this every week because this is the Big Ten, and this is what we. Sorry, Tyler says it in jest. I'm all about the special teams. What are the Michigan State special teams bring to the table, especially Behringer, who has a fantastic mustache in his profile picture.
Right, and then he pairs it with the sport goggles, like the glasses goggles thing. He's got a heck of a look going on. Yeah, what a celebration of Big Ten football this will be. We got the Land Grant Trophy. We got two elite punters. I mean, this is amazing stuff here, guys.
What more could you want? Yeah,
exactly. We need like 15 degrees and snow, and it'll just be perfect, So yeah, he's good though. Bryce is good, and he was just kind of a guy last year. He's made major strides. He might be, to be honest, as improved as any player on this team. And for a defense that can give up 80 yards like that, he's been important. Against Ohio State, it really didn't matter because they were scoring in 90 seconds anyway, and they could do it any way they wanted to do it. But he's been important in terms of pinning guys and making them, because early on when it was all working, it was like, okay, this is a nice plan here. You pin them deep, make them go 90, 80, 70 yards on you, and the more times you make them snap it, we're going to be able to capitalize on your mistakes. And that's really what they were. I've said a lot of bad things about their defense on this podcast, but they've all been true, though. It's been true basically the whole year, but then they get the interception in the red zone. They get the timely strip sack that kills a drive, things like that. They were really able to make those timely plays, and that made up for it. So Behringer's been great. Their kicker, Matt Coughlin, is hurt right now, so that's something to watch. And Penn State fans know Matt Coughlin. He's been around a long time, 6-year guy. He's dealing with a hip flexor, I believe it is, lower body thing. So it's been an issue for a couple weeks now. Still pretty good on kickoffs, but he's a guy that's never had the strongest leg, even when he was healthy. So anything from past 40 yards, honestly, is a little dicey with him too. He's never had the strong leg. 50 yards, 50 plus, forget about it. I mean, that's a coin flip at best. And now that he's hurt, you got to add that factor in. So that's something to watch. If it's a field goal type of game, low scoring or whatever, last second drive type of deal, that's something to watch because he's not fully there, I don't think, right now. On the return end, Jaden Reed was their guy. So if he's not, he's returned 2 punts for touchdowns this year. He's had a couple nice kickoff returns. He's the guy there. If he's not able to go, that's a major drop off there because he's their best guy by a mile there. I don't know who else they would turn to, and you definitely wouldn't be able to give him anything close to Reed. So that's kind of the situation there. Another thing to watch, they for some reason, even this late in the season, they're good for a punt team penalty once a game, some type of illegal motion or illegal formation. They're still getting those, so that's something to keep an eye on. And that's about it, though. Yeah, the return game I would think would be heavily diminished without Reed. Behringer's good. Coughlin shaky from distance, but otherwise pretty reliable.
Well, it's a holiday week, so we wanted to get our listeners a bunch on Michigan State right off the bat. You certainly did that for us, Stephen. Thank you very much. He is Stephen Brooks, covers these Spartans for 24/7 Sports, SpartanTailgate.com. We'll follow your coverage throughout the week to see what's going on in East Lansing. Anything we can do to return the favor here from Happy Valley, you let us know. We'll talk to you real soon. Thanks for hopping on the podcast.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Good safe travels heading out here if either of you guys are, and have a good holiday.
All right, take care.
See you, man.
Well, I still don't know where my prediction is going to land, Sean, but I'll tell you what, going to have to take a bit of a re-examination of the Spartans after that conversation with Stephen Brooks. And if I see one person on our message boards or on social media call him a homer after his comments today from Michigan State, you're getting muted.
He joined us a little late because he had to rearrange his office because the lighting was bad. He said it was just a shadow on his face. If we've got Michigan State fans that watch this, he might want to put a shadow on his face and make his voice change because they're not going to like that one too much.
No, and you look at the early odds from Vegas. This one is right down the wire, and we think about where these two programs were this time last week and what was ahead of them. It's crazy how much can change in college football in just a few days, but that's the way it goes. Sean, we've got a few things coming up. Wednesday, expecting more of another peek in at practice. We plan to be there. We'll be there Wednesday night. But between now and then, just kind of waiting for maybe something to pop up with James Franklin. I think a lot of people are saying, what was he talking about in the post game, as he'll be willing to open up on Tuesday about some long-term stuff and his commitment to the program. He's got to pay due on that rent, because if he shows up Tuesday in the press conference and has nothing to say, he can do it. But people are not going to be necessarily pleased. And he kind of threw a carrot out there in front of everybody's face. Hold on, wait 72 hours. Tuesday you'll find something out. Last week of the season, some of that coaching job speculation has died down. People think an extension. I don't know where we're going to land on this, but Franklin's got to come due with something, I guess, on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing extension for a couple of weeks now, but I tell you what, after Mel Tucker's extension leaked last week, and then they went out and did what they did against Ohio State, maybe in season's not the time to do that. But yeah, we've been hearing extension for a while. It'll be interesting to see if there's confirmed figures to go along with it.
Stay tuned for that. If something pops, we'll probably get a breaking podcast to you. Otherwise, we're back with you on Wednesday, and we'll break down this matchup from a Penn State perspective, come to you with any updates on health status. There's a lot to learn about this Nittany Lions squad from that standpoint this week still. Follow all of our coverage at lions247.com. On behalf of our producer, Lance Glenn, my co-host, Sean Fitz, thank you to Stephen Brooks for joining us. I'm Tyler Donohue. This is the Lions 24/7 podcast.